The call, a 10-month-old baby was unconscious, and authorities needed to rush to the scene with EMS to save the child's life.
Work them. Hang right here and your dog will come out with you.
So you guys going to 97 at the residence.
Mom, grandmother.
The first thing investigators had to understand was how a normal summer morning became the final morning of a 10-month-old child's life. A mother arrived expecting to pick up her daughter after a few hours of babysitting. She expected a familiar face at the door, a quick conversation, and the simple routine that had happened many times before. Instead, she was met with confusion. A question was asked. A realization followed. And within moments, the driveway became the center of a tragedy that would leave a family devastated, divide a community, and eventually place a trusted caregiver in the middle of a criminal courtroom. The person responsible for watching over the child was not a stranger. She was someone who had been welcomed into the family's life for years, someone who had been trusted around children, someone who had been considered part of their circle. But on July 19, 2023, investigators would begin asking a question that had no easy answer. How could a child who was supposed to be safe disappear from someone's attention for hours? The case that followed was not only about a heartbreaking loss. It became a legal battle over responsibility, memory, negligence, and whether a devastating mistake could become a criminal act.
That's her. That's going up to the sheriff's office. Take her. Yeah. Come back. It won't take long. Just to drop her off and now sit on. Okay.
Is there anything we need to do before crime scene?
It would involve a police investigation, forensic evidence, emotional courtroom testimony, a murder conviction, an appeal, and a family determined to make sure their daughter's name was remembered. Before we continue, please know that this documentary involves the death of a young child. We will discuss the facts of the case, but we will avoid graphic descriptions out of respect for the victim, her family, and everyone affected. If you are new here, welcome. Subscribe for carefully researched true crime documentaries focused on facts, investigations, and the people behind these cases. To everyone who has supported this channel through your views, comments, likes, and shares, thank you. Your support helps these stories reach more people. Let us know where you are watching from. Now, let's begin. On July 19, 2023, Brooke Page drove to a babysitter's home in McLenny, Florida, expecting an ordinary afternoon pickup. Her daughter, Arya Renee Page, was only 10 months old. Like many working parents, Brooke and her husband Justice had built a childcare routine around people they trusted. Arya was not being left with a stranger. She was being cared for by someone who had been connected to their family for years. That person was Rhonda Charmaine Jewell. Rhonda had been part of their lives long before this day. She had a history of caring for children, and the Page family believed Arya was in safe hands. But when Brooke arrived that afternoon, something immediately felt wrong. The person who normally cared for Arya was there, but the child Brooke came to collect was nowhere inside the home. Questions were asked. Answers were unclear. And then Rhonda moved quickly toward her vehicle. Inside that SUV was Arya. The child had remained there for several hours while Rhonda was inside the house caring for other children. Emergency responders were called. Brooke attempted to help her daughter while waiting for medical assistance.
Work them.
Arya was transported to a hospital where doctors worked to save her. But despite those efforts, Arya did not survive. For Brooke and Justice Page, the life they had built around their daughter changed in a matter of hours. The child they had planned for, protected, and loved was gone. But as investigators began examining what happened, they faced a difficult question. Was this a tragic accident caused by a terrible lapse in judgment? Or was it something more serious?
Today was an earlier day because the other lady needed me at 8:15, so I picked her up at 8 o'clock, which is usually 8:30. Anyway, so I picked her up, and I pulled through Burger King to get something to eat, but the line was too long, so I left and went to the job I was at.
On the State Street, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I got there at 8:15, and the baby was like, because she was asleep, she was quiet, and because I don't keep her every day, I forgot she was there. So I went inside, got busy with the other kids, and I even talked to the mom throughout the day, and it just didn't click.
Right.
That the baby was outside.
So that was at 8 o'clock. What time did you realize the baby was outside?
When it was girl,
You know what time roughly that was?
one.
When 911 was called? Okay. How many kids were in the car when you got home with her, when you got to that house today? Just her?
Just her.
Just her?
Rhonda told the officer,
Under the law. That question would eventually be decided inside a courtroom. The investigation began almost immediately. The Baker County Sheriff's Office treated Arya's death as a criminal investigation. Detectives needed to reconstruct every moment of that morning. They needed to know, when did Rhonda arrive? When did Arya enter the vehicle? How long was she left there? What was happening inside the home during those hours? And most importantly, why did no one realize the child was missing? Investigators examined the vehicle, the timeline, witness statements, and Rhonda Jewell's own explanation of what happened. According to Rhonda's account, she believed Arya was asleep when they arrived at the babysitting location. She said that because she was focused on caring for the other children, she failed to remember that Arya was still inside the vehicle. But investigators questioned that explanation. During the day, Rhonda had contact with Arya's mother. That detail became one of the issues prosecutors later focused on. How could someone communicate with the child's parent while the child remained outside? That question became central to the case. As the investigation continued, the tragedy moved beyond one family. The story spread throughout Baker County. People who knew Rhonda struggled to understand what had happened. People who knew the Page family wanted answers. And for Brooke and Justice, the focus quickly became preserving Arya's memory and seeking accountability. But before understanding the investigation, the courtroom, and the legal fight that followed, it was important to understand who Arya was. Because behind every headline was not just a case. There was a little girl, a daughter, a granddaughter, and a child whose life had barely begun. Before July 19, 2023, Arya Renee Page was known by her family simply as a happy little girl who brought energy into every room she entered. Her story began with Brooke Taylor Leo and Justice Kelvs Page. The two had known each other since their teenage years in Baker County, Florida. Their relationship grew over time, and after several years together, Justice proposed. On October 9, 2021, they married. Their family described their relationship as one built around loyalty, friendship, and shared plans for the future. They wanted a simple life, a home, a family, and eventually, children. In early 2022, Brooke discovered she was pregnant. The pregnancy was not without challenges. Brooke developed preeclampsia, a serious pregnancy complication involving dangerously high blood pressure that can affect both mother and baby. Because of the medical concerns, Arya arrived earlier than expected. On September 4, 2022, Arya Renee Page was born approximately 6 weeks premature. She weighed just over 4 pounds. Because she was born early, doctors monitored her in the neonatal intensive care unit at Wolfson Children's Hospital in Jacksonville. For 2 weeks, Brooke and Justice waited before they were finally able to bring their daughter home. From that moment forward, Arya became the center of their world. Her grandparents also played an important role in her life. Justice's parents, Pamela Page and her husband, were excited to welcome their first granddaughter. On Brooke's side, Monique Carter also became part of Arya's support system. The family worked together to make sure Arya was surrounded by people who loved her. They watched her grow from a fragile newborn into an active and curious baby. According to her family, Arya loved being around her father. She enjoyed spending time outdoors and going boating with him. She had favorite toys that became part of her daily life. She was beginning to reach important milestones. She was becoming more independent, and her parents believed they were watching the beginning of a lifetime of memories. But that lifetime would be much shorter than anyone expected. To understand why this case shocked the community, It is important to understand who Rhonda Charmaine Jewell was before July 19, 2023. Rhonda was not viewed by the Page family as an outsider. She was someone familiar, someone they had known for years, someone who had been present during important moments in their lives. For many parents in the McClenny area, Rhonda was known as a dependable childcare provider. She had spent much of her adult life around children, beginning babysitting when she was a teenager. Later, after raising her own children, she returned to caring for other families' children. She was not operating a large licensed daycare facility. Instead, she provided childcare from her home, where parents would bring their children while they worked. Families who knew her described her as someone who enjoyed being around children and had experience caring for them. That reputation was one of the reasons Brooke and Justice felt comfortable allowing Arya to stay with her. But the connection went beyond a typical babysitter relationship. Rhonda had been friends with Arya's grandmother, Monique Carter, for years. She had been present during important family events, including Brooke and Justice's wedding and Arya's baby shower. She was not a random person hired from an advertisement. She was someone the family already knew, someone they believed they could trust. When Arya needed childcare after Brooke's maternity leave ended, the family carefully planned her schedule. At first, relatives helped care for her. The arrangement worked well, but eventually, circumstances changed, and the family needed another option. That was when Rhonda became part of Arya's weekly routine. The schedule was carefully organized. Rhonda watched Arya on certain weekdays. Other days were covered by family members. Pamela Page cared for Arya on some days. Monique Carter adjusted her own schedule to help. The goal was simple: keep Arya surrounded by people who loved her. For Brooke and Justice, this was the kind of support system many working parents depend on. They were not choosing between care and no care. They believed they had found a safe environment for their daughter. And for months, that arrangement continued without any major concerns. By the summer of 2023, Rhonda was familiar with Arya's routine. She knew when Brooke would arrive. She knew Arya's habits. She knew the child's personality. The family believed she understood the responsibility that came with caring for a young child. That is what made the events of July 19th so difficult for everyone involved. The tragedy did not begin with a stranger. It began inside a circle of trust. In the days leading up to the incident, there was no public indication that anything unusual was happening. For the Page family, life continued normally. They were raising their daughter, balancing work responsibilities, and depending on a childcare arrangement they believed was reliable. Arya was approaching her first birthday. She was reaching new stages of development. Her parents were watching her personality become clearer every day. She was no longer the tiny newborn who had spent time in the NICU. She was an active baby learning about the world around her. The family was preparing for the future. They were thinking about birthdays, milestones, and the years ahead. No one knew that their lives were about to change permanently. The morning of July 19th began like many other mornings. Brooke prepared Arya for the day. She made sure her daughter was dressed and ready. She packed the items a baby might need while away from home. The bag included everyday necessities such as diapers, wipes, a pacifier, and medication. It was the kind of preparation parents do without thinking. A normal routine, a normal morning. At around 8 a.m., Rhonda Jewell arrived to pick Arya up. However, that morning was slightly different. Rhonda was running behind schedule because she needed to arrive earlier than usual at another childcare location. She was expected at a home where other children were waiting. According to investigators and later testimony, Rhonda picked Arya up and drove to the second location. During the drive, Arya was quiet. Rhonda later told investigators she believed the baby was asleep. When she arrived, her attention turned toward getting inside and beginning her childcare responsibilities. The morning had already changed from the normal routine. She was arriving later than expected. Other children were waiting. And according to Rhonda's account, she believed Arya was still sleeping. That assumption would become one of the most important details in the entire case. After parking the SUV, Rhonda walked into the home. Inside were other children who needed supervision. The day continued. Children needed attention. Meals needed to be prepared. Normal childcare tasks continued. But outside, Arya remained inside the vehicle. As time passed, investigators later determined that conditions inside the SUV became extremely dangerous. The Florida summer heat created a rapidly changing environment inside the vehicle. A car parked outdoors can become significantly hotter than the outside temperature, especially when exposed to direct sunlight. This would later become a major part of the prosecution's argument. The state argued that the danger was predictable and that the responsibility of a caregiver was to ensure the child was safe. The defense argued that the event was a tragic mistake, not an intentional act. That disagreement would eventually become the central issue at trial. For approximately 5 hours, Rhonda continued her childcare duties. According to investigators, she also had communication with Arya's mother during that period. That detail became one of the most heavily discussed parts of the investigation. Because if Rhonda was able to communicate with Brooke, prosecutors argued, it raised questions about how Arya could still be forgotten. Shortly after 1 p.m., Brooke arrived to pick up her daughter. She expected the normal exchange, a goodbye between caregiver and child, a trip home. Instead, the next few minutes would become the moment that changed everything. When Brooke asked about Arya, the situation immediately became clear. Rhonda realized something was wrong. She moved toward the vehicle, and what Brooke discovered next would begin a criminal investigation that lasted more than a year. When Brooke Page arrived that afternoon, she believed she was walking into another ordinary pickup. The routine was familiar. She had done this many times before. She expected to see her daughter, gather Arya's things, and leave. But instead, she found herself asking a question that immediately changed the direction of the day. Where was Arya? The answer was not inside the home, and within moments, Rhonda Jewell realized what had happened. She moved quickly toward her SUV. Brooke followed. Inside the vehicle was the child everyone had been searching for. Arya was still secured in her car seat. The bag Brooke had packed earlier that morning was still nearby, with the items inside untouched. The discovery immediately turned a normal afternoon into an emergency. Brooke began trying to help her daughter while emergency services were contacted. The situation was chaotic. Family members and first responders were trying to understand what had happened, while also focusing.
What you need, Paul?
Yeah, she's burning up. Got it?
Yep.
Here, I'll help you hold.
I got it.
The car doors were open too, so I'm not sure if they just came out of the
She in the
car.
car?
She's burnt. I mean, she
Yeah,
so
I feel like feeling her in her neck.
Yeah. Let me know when you're ready, Polly.
On saving Arya. Emergency personnel arrived at the scene and took over medical efforts. Arya was transported for further treatment. But despite those efforts, she could not be saved. For Brooke and Justice, the reality they had feared became true. Their daughter was gone. As emergency responders worked, investigators began looking beyond the immediate tragedy. They needed answers. A child had been placed in someone's care. That caregiver had a responsibility. Now investigators needed to determine exactly how that responsibility had failed. They began reconstructing the timeline. Every minute mattered. When was Arya picked up? When did Rhonda arrive? How long was the child inside the vehicle? What happened during those hours? And was there anything that suggested this was more than an accident? The Baker County Sheriff's Office quickly treated Arya's death as a criminal investigation.
Arya from her house, but today was an earlier day because the other lady needed me at 8:15, so I picked her up at 8 o'clock, which is usually 8:30. Anyway, so I picked her up and I pulled through Burger King to get something to eat, but the line was too long, so I left and went to the job I was at.
On the State Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I got there at 8:15, and the baby was like, because she was asleep, she was quiet, and because I don't keep her every day, I forgot she was there. So I went inside, got busy with the other kids, and I even talked to the mom throughout the day, and it just didn't click.
Right.
That the baby was up.
So that was at 8 o'clock. What time did you realize the baby was outside?
When it was girl,
You know what time roughly that was?
one.
When 911 was called?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How many kids were in the car when you got home with her, when you got to that house today? Just her?
Just her.
Just her?
Rhonda told the officer.
Detectives began collecting evidence and interviewing everyone connected to the situation. The investigation focused on several areas: the vehicle where Arya was found, the timeline of events, witness statements, Rhonda Jewell's explanation, environmental conditions that day, medical findings. Investigators also examined Rhonda's actions before and after Arya was discovered. The central question was not simply what happened. Everyone knew Arya had been left inside the SUV. The larger question was, why did it happen? Rhonda Jewell was interviewed by investigators after the incident. During questioning, she described the morning from her perspective. She explained that she had picked Arya up earlier than usual because she needed to arrive at another childcare location. She said Arya appeared quiet and that she believed the child was sleeping. She told investigators that once she entered the home, she became focused on caring for the other children. According to her statement, she did not realize Arya was still in the vehicle until Brooke arrived. Rhonda described the moment she understood what had happened as a shock. However, investigators focused on details that raised additional questions. One of those details involved communication. According to investigators, Rhonda had contact with Brooke during the time Arya was still inside the vehicle. Prosecutors later argued that this made the situation difficult to explain as a simple moment of forgetfulness. The defense, however, argued that human memory can fail under stress and routine, and that the tragedy was not intentional. This disagreement would become the foundation of the courtroom battle. As investigators built their case, they examined the physical evidence surrounding Arya's death. One important factor was the heat inside the vehicle. The day had been extremely hot in Florida. Officials examined the conditions and determined that temperatures inside the vehicle could have reached dangerous levels. Investigators explained that even when outside temperatures are below extreme levels, vehicles can heat rapidly when exposed to sunlight. The inside of a vehicle can become much hotter than the surrounding air. This evidence became significant because prosecutors argued that the danger should have been obvious to an experienced caregiver. Medical findings also played a major role. The medical examiner determined Arya's cause of death and provided evidence about what happened to her. Those findings helped establish the timeline and supported the investigators' reconstruction of events. The case was not based on one piece of evidence. Instead, prosecutors built their argument from multiple sources: the timeline, witness accounts, Rhonda's statements, environmental conditions, medical evidence. Together, they argued that Arya's death was the result of criminal negligence. The defense viewed the situation differently. They did not dispute that Arya died after being left inside the vehicle. Instead, they challenged the idea that Rhonda committed murder. Their argument centered on intent. They argued that there was no evidence Rhonda wanted harm to come to Arya. No motive, no planning, no reason to believe the event was deliberate. The defense maintained that the case involved a devastating mistake, not a criminal act. As investigators continued their work, the case moved from an investigation into formal criminal proceedings. Rhonda Jewell was arrested.
What you need us to do?
I just need her escorted up to the sheriff's office. Take her.
Come back.
It won't take long. Just to drop her off and then I'll sit on her.
Okay. Is there anything we need to do for crime scene?
Let me look real fast, Mr.
That's a question for her. Okay. As of right now, I'm not quite sure.
Okay. Because I have no details either.
No.
Yeah, I have nothing. That's why I'm asking.
Can I go check?
Yeah. Can I come inside with you to make sure? Okay.
Tell her to
Hey,
bring
can
some
you-
ID
Can
too.
you go with her?
Hey,
She's got to change.
have her bring her ID back too.
Did she tell her to call my husband? Go tell her.
Call her husband.
What's his, Miss Rhonda, what's his number? I'm going to jail.
Miss Ronda, can I use your phone? Can I have your phone? It's just for the duration of the escort, okay?
Road 8, Market Side.
The charges reflected the seriousness with which prosecutors viewed Arya's death. She faced charges including murder, manslaughter, child neglect. The decision to pursue a murder charge became one of the most debated aspects of the case, because the question facing prosecutors was complex. Could someone be held responsible for murder when they claimed they never intended for the child to die? At her initial
It wouldn't be fair because it's not a murder charge. He ordered her to wear a GPS monitoring device and have no contact with the victim's family.
It's a tragic case with tragic consequences and will have consequences for the defendant, but she is entitled to a bond while not only the case is investigated, but while it's everyone is trying to determine what the proper outcome would be.
A police report says Jewel told authorities she was babysitting the infant and picked her up Wednesday morning. Jewel says she took the baby to the home where she was caring for 3 other children. She went inside the home without the baby and started talking to the other kids, completely forgetting about the baby outside. When the baby's mother came to pick her up from the home, she found her daughter still strapped in the car seat, not breathing.
The whole community suffers when something like this happens. We've seen it a number of times across the state and as well throughout the United States.
Special court proceedings, a judge considered the circumstances of the case, the charges, and whether Rhonda should remain in custody. Conditions were placed on her release, including restrictions involving contact with Arya's family. The prosecution argued that the seriousness of the case justified keeping her detained. The defense emphasized that Rhonda had no history suggesting she was dangerous and argued that the tragedy was not intentional. Meanwhile, the Page family was beginning a different kind of fight. They were grieving the loss of their daughter while also navigating a legal system that would take months to determine what happened. They wanted accountability. They wanted Arya's story remembered. And they wanted people to understand the dangers that can occur when children are left in hot vehicles. The case had now moved beyond a heartbreaking incident. It had become a question for a jury. A question about responsibility. A question about memory. And a question that would eventually decide whether Rhonda Jewel would spend years behind bars. While the legal process began, Brooke and Justice Page were facing a reality no parent should ever have to experience. Their daughter was gone. The future they had imagined with Arya had disappeared overnight. The first days after her death were filled with grief, unanswered questions, and the difficult process of saying goodbye. But even while mourning, the family made a decision. They did not want Arya's story to end with the circumstances of her death. They wanted people to remember who she was. A daughter, a granddaughter, a child who was loved. On July 25, 2023, family members, friends, and members of the Baker County community gathered to honor Arya's life. The funeral was held at Christian Fellowship Temple in McLenny. Those who attended came together to support the Page family and remember the little girl they had lost. Photographs showed Arya as her family knew her, happy, curious, surrounded by people who loved her. After the service, Arya was laid to rest at Quitman Cemetery in Sanderson, Florida. She never reached her first birthday. A milestone her family had expected to celebrate became a reminder of everything they had lost. But the Page family did not remain silent. They began speaking publicly about Arya and the circumstances surrounding her death. Their goal was not only justice for their daughter. They wanted awareness. They wanted other families to understand the dangers of leaving children in vehicles, even briefly. They shared Arya's story because they believed another tragedy could be prevented. Following Arya's death, community members gathered in support of the family. They held signs. They shared her photographs. They called for accountability. The message was simple: justice for Arya. The gatherings became a way for people to support Brooke and Justice, while also...
The rally is called Justice for Arya. You see dozens of people stationed at the 4 corners of the intersection of McLenny Avenue and 6th Street. A lot of people holding up different signs with pictures of Arya. And their message is that they say they want justice for Arya, including that same message coming from her parents. Baby Arya kissing her mother. This is the last video Brooke and Justice Page have of their only child.
She grabbed my shirt and pulled up on me, and I was like, oh my gosh, Arya, I think we're almost to your first steps.
She would pull on my chin and the little bit of hair that I have. she'd pull on it, and she'd always just come up to me, and if I'm asleep, she'd slap me and wake me up, and she just...
Bringing attention to child safety issues. The family's grief became connected to a larger conversation about hot vehicle deaths involving children. Brooke and Justice also became advocates for change. They supported efforts aimed at increasing awareness and preventing similar tragedies. Their campaign became known as Arya's Law. The goal was to encourage stronger awareness and education around children being left in hot vehicles. The issue was larger than one case. Across the United States, children have died after being left in vehicles during hot weather. These cases often happen during ordinary routines, which is why safety organizations emphasize creating habits that prevent accidental situations. In Florida, Arya's story contributed to renewed attention on the issue. Governor Ron DeSantis later signed legislation recognizing April as Hot Car Child Death Prevention Month in Florida. For the Page family, the advocacy was part of keeping Arya's memory alive. They could not change what happened, but they hoped her name could help protect other children. More than a year after Arya's death, the case finally reached trial. By November 2024, the question that had surrounded the...
On the 10 o'clock news, a Baker County babysitter is now a convicted murderer. Earlier this evening, a jury convicted 46-year-old Rhonda Jewell in the death of 10-month-old Arya Page. Arya's parents, they're relieved.
I felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I feel like I finally accomplished something for Arya. I feel like I did right by her, constantly fighting and never giving up and always pushing forward.
That's Arya's mother. On July 19th of last year, she and the babysitter discovered Arya's body in the back seat of an SUV.
Yeah, Rhonda Jewell was Arya's babysitter, and she said that she forgot she left the child in a hot SUV for 5 hours. News for Jax reporter Eric Abanier has been following the case since it began. He joins us live outside the Baker County Courthouse, where Rhonda Jewell was convicted today.
The case from the beginning was placed before a jury. Was Rhonda Jewell guilty of murder, or was this a tragic mistake that did not meet the legal standard for murder? The prosecution and defense presented two very different versions of the same day. Both sides agreed on the basic facts. Arya had been left inside the vehicle. Arya died afterward. Rhonda Jewell was responsible for her care. But the meaning behind those facts was where the disagreement began. The prosecution argued that Rhonda had a duty to protect Arya. She had accepted responsibility for a child who could not protect herself. According to prosecutors, the failure was not a simple oversight. They argued that Rhonda's actions showed a level of disregard that reached criminal responsibility. Their argument focused on several points. Rhonda had experience caring for children. She knew Arya was in her care. The child remained outside for hours. Rhonda communicated with Brooke during that time. The conditions inside the vehicle were dangerous. To prosecutors, the phrase, "I forgot," was not enough. They argued that forgetting did not remove responsibility. The defense presented a different picture. They argued that Rhonda was not a person who wanted harm to happen. They pointed to her decades of childcare experience and her relationship with the Page family. They argued that the tragedy was exactly that, a tragedy, not a crime. The defense emphasized the absence of intent. They argued there was no evidence Rhonda planned anything, wanted Arya injured, or acted with the mindset of someone committing murder. The courtroom became the place where every detail of July 19th was examined. The prosecution called witnesses who helped reconstruct the timeline. They presented evidence from investigators, medical professionals, and people.
It took a toll on us, our family. There was a couple bumps in the road. But we pushed through. We pushed through together as a family, as a community. And we just kept going.
Attorney John Phillips is now representing the Page family and announced the criminal conviction against Jewell is just the beginning.
As of this moment, Rhonda is a convicted felon and a convicted murderer of Arya, and that's what's important. And, you know, we've gotten through the hard part. Babies be babies. We've gotten through the hard part of the criminal trial. We are
people connected to the case. The jury heard about the morning pickup, the arrival at the babysitting location, the hours that followed. And the moment Brooke arrived, Arya's parents also testified. For Brooke and Justice, appearing in court meant describing the person they lost while sitting only a short distance away from the woman responsible for caring for their daughter. Justice Page spoke about receiving the news that Arya had died. He described the moment as something that changed his life.
I was looking around and I asked, "Where's Arya?" And my mom told me that she had passed away.
Were you ever allowed to go see Arya?
Yes, sir.
And where was that at?
It's in a hospital room. She was laying in the bed.
And were other family members allowed in there with you?
Yes, sir.
Permanently. He explained the future he had imagined with his daughter, watching her grow, taking her to school, seeing her reach milestones. Those moments would never happen. Brooke testified about Arya's personality. She described her daughter as a happy child who brought joy to their home. She spoke about the memories they had created in only 10 months. She described the milestones Arya was reaching shortly before her death. The testimony showed the jury that this case was not only about evidence, it was about a child whose life had ended.
And I said, "Here." I said, "Where you at?" And she said, "I'm at the door." And I said, "Oh." And
did you go to the door at that time?
I did, but I didn't know why she was there. So I was like, "What are you doing?" And she said, "I'm here." And so I asked her where she was at. She said, "I'm at the door."
Did you go to the front door?
I did.
What happened when you opened the front door?
She opened up the door, and I seen her, and I was still in shock while she was there. And so she had money in her hand and her keys. And that's when I realized I didn't get the baby in the car. I forgot the baby in the car. And so I pushed her out the way. And I was screaming, "Oh my God, Brooke, oh my God, oh my God, Brooke." And I could hear her saying, what? And I ran to the car. And I opened up the door, and she was still there. Arya was still in the back seat.
Rhonda Jewell eventually took the stand in her own defense. She described the morning from her perspective. She told the jury that she believed Arya was asleep and that she became focused on the other children inside the home. She said she did not realize Arya remained in the vehicle until Brooke arrived. Her testimony centered on one argument, that what happened was a devastating failure of memory, not an intentional crime. The prosecution challenged that explanation. They questioned how someone responsible for a baby could go hours without realizing the child was missing. They highlighted the communication between Rhonda and Brooke. They questioned decisions made after Arya was found. They argued that the evidence showed more than an accident. After both sides finished presenting their arguments, the case was placed in the hands of the jury. 12 people now had to decide. Was this criminal negligence? Was it manslaughter? Was it murder? Or was it a terrible mistake that should not result in the most serious criminal conviction? The answer would determine Rhonda Jewell's future, and it would determine how the justice system viewed Arya's death. After hearing weeks of testimony and reviewing the evidence, the jury was left with one difficult responsibility. They had to decide what happened on July 19, 2023. The facts were not disputed. Arya Page had died after being left inside a vehicle. Rhonda Jewell was the person responsible for her care. The question was whether her actions crossed the legal line from a tragic mistake into a criminal offense. The prosecution had argued that responsibility came with the position Rhonda held. She was not simply someone who happened to be nearby. She was the caregiver. Arya had been placed in her custody because the family believed she would protect her. The state argued that failing to check on a 10-month-old child for hours represented a level of negligence that could not be excused. The defense continued to argue that the case was a tragedy, not murder. They maintained that Rhonda did not intend to harm Arya. They pointed to her history as a caregiver, her relationship with the family, and the absence of any motive. The defense asked the jury to separate the heartbreaking outcome from the legal question of criminal intent. After deliberation, the jury reached a decision. Rhonda Charmaine Jewell was found guilty. The verdict brought an official conclusion to the trial phase of the case. For the Page family, it represented accountability, but it did not represent closure. No verdict could return Arya to them. No sentence could restore the future they had imagined. In December 2024, Rhonda Jewell returned to court for sentencing. The courtroom once again became the place where both sides of the tragedy were heard. Prosecutors asked the judge to impose a significant prison sentence, arguing that the seriousness of Arya's death required accountability. The defense presented letters from people who knew Rhonda before the tragedy. They described a woman who had spent years caring for children and who was deeply affected by what happened. They asked the court to consider her history and circumstances. Before receiving her sentence, Rhonda addressed the Page family. She apologized for what happened. She acknowledged that Brooke and Justice had trusted her with their daughter, and that she failed in that responsibility. She expressed regret and asked for forgiveness. But for Arya's parents, the pain of losing their daughter remained. An apology could acknowledge the damage. It could not undo it. Brooke and Justice also gave victim impact statements. They spoke about the life Arya should have had. They spoke about the memories they would never create, the birthdays, the milestones, the ordinary moments parents expect to experience with their children. Their words reflected not only anger, but the permanent absence left behind. The judge ultimately sentenced Rhonda Charmaine
House, and Alexis prosecutors asked the judge to give Jewell the maximum sentence.
And Phil, that would have been 20 years, but instead, Rhonda Jewell will spend 17 years in prison. This is something the victims' family members are pleased with. Family members and friends for both Rhonda Jewell and 10-month-old Arya Page were all present inside the courtroom today, and today's sentencing comes just a month after a jury found Jewell guilty of third-degree murder for leaving Arya to die in a car. Jewell was babysitting Arya in July of 2023 when prosecutors say she left the baby in the car sweltering in 133 degrees for 5 hours. But Jewell was spared the charge of aggravated manslaughter because the jury felt she did not knowingly take a risk leading to Arya's death. We spoke with Arya's mother, Brooke, minutes after the sentence was announced.
I feel like a weight has been lifted off of our shoulders. I feel like we have accomplished, not only for the family, but for the community, for Arya. I just feel like we have now made it to where we've been trying to be for a year and a half.
Coming up on Action News Jax at 4, the emotional testimony inside the courtroom and the letter the defendant read to Arya's family. For local coverage you can count on, we're live in Baker County. Alexis Clevenger, Action News Jax.
Jewell to 17 years in prison. The sentence represented the court's decision that her actions carried serious criminal consequences. For the Page family, it was a measure of accountability, but their daughter was still gone. After the conviction and sentencing, the case entered another legal stage. Rhonda Jewell's attorneys filed an appeal. The appeal challenged aspects of the conviction and raised questions about whether the legal standard for the murder charge had been properly applied. The argument focused on the difference between a tragic mistake and criminal responsibility. The defense maintained that the evidence did not support the most serious conviction. For the Page family, the appeal brought another difficult period. After months of investigation, trial preparation, and waiting for justice, the case was no longer completely settled. The legal process continued. In early 2025, Rhonda Jewell was released on bond, while the appeal moved forward. For Brooke and Justice, seeing the woman convicted in their daughter's death temporarily out of prison created another painful chapter. The legal system was still working through questions that had remained since the beginning. The appeal highlighted one of the most difficult issues in criminal law. How should the justice system handle cases where a person's actions cause a death, but their intentions are disputed? That question was at the center of Rhonda Jewell's case. For the Page family, life after Arya was not about moving on. It was about learning how to continue living while carrying a loss that could never be replaced. Their home changed, their routines changed, the future they had planned changed. But Arya remained part of their lives. Her name continued to be spoken. Her photographs remained visible. Her memory continued through the people who loved her. Brooke and Justice later welcomed another child, a son named Case Kelvs Page, born in July 2024. His arrival brought happiness back into their home. but they made it clear that a new child could never replace Arya. Each child has their own place in a family. Case's birth did not erase the pain of losing his sister. Instead, it became another reason for the family to continue forward. Brooke has spoken about wishing Arya could have known her younger brother. She imagined the relationship they might have shared, the moments they might have experienced together. But that future was taken away. The family continues to honor Arya through memories, advocacy, and the message they hope others learn from her story. One of the ways Arya is remembered is through a memorial wind chime at the family's home. For them, it represents a connection, a reminder that although Arya's life was brief, her impact was lasting. The case of Arya Page began with an ordinary routine, a parent leaving her child with someone she trusted, a caregiver beginning another day of work, a family expecting their daughter to come home. Instead, it became a tragedy that reached a courtroom and forced difficult questions about responsibility, trust, and accountability. Rhonda Jewell was not a stranger to the Page family. That was part of what made this case so painful. Trust had been placed in someone who had been part of their lives, and that trust ended with a loss that could never be repaired. Arya's story also became part of a larger conversation about child safety. Her family chose to speak publicly because they believed awareness could prevent another family from experiencing the same heartbreak. The circumstances surrounding her death serve as a reminder that dangerous situations can develop during ordinary moments. That is why safety experts encourage parents, caregivers, and communities to create habits that help ensure children are always accounted for. Behind every true crime case are real people, real families, real consequences. Arya Page was not just a name connected to a courtroom case. She was a daughter, a granddaughter, a child who was loved deeply during the 10 months she was here. And for the people who knew her, that is how she will always be remembered. Thank you for watching. If you appreciate carefully researched true crime documentaries that focus on facts, justice, and remembering the people behind the cases, consider subscribing. Your support through likes, comments, and shares helps these stories reach more viewers and keeps important conversations alive. Rest in peace, Arya Renee Page.